I'm a 30-year-old guy, and this story is about my family, specifically my younger sister, Emily, who's 28. To say that Emily and I have always been different would be an understatement. While I lean toward being practical and measured, Emily has always been competitive, entitled, and prone to drama. Growing up, she was the kind of kid who had to have the best toys, the last word, and apparently the world revolve around her. Our dad, a retired entrepreneur, has been the glue holding this dysfunctional family together. He's worked hard all his life, and his success has left him with a sizable estate. Dad's been pretty open about his plans for the inheritance, an equal split between me and Emily, with a trust clause to make sure things stay secure. Simple enough, right? Well, nothing stays simple for long with Emily in the picture. For some context, Emily and her husband Eric are not exactly the poster couple for financial stability. Emily's penchant for luxury handbags, fancy vacations, and an Instagram-worthy lifestyle has racked up some serious debt. Eric isn't much better. He hops between jobs and seems more invested in get-rich-quick schemes than actual work. Meanwhile, I've been steadily building my career and keeping my financial house in order. Our paths couldn't be more different, and I've sensed Emily resenting that over the years. Things came to a head recently when Dad had a minor stroke. Thankfully, he's okay now, but it was a wake-up call for all of us. After his recovery, he brought up the inheritance again, wanting to make sure everything was clear in case something unexpected happened. Emily didn't waste a second dropping hints about her financial struggles. At first, it was subtle. Comments about rising costs, Eric's bad luck with jobs, and how hard it is to provide for her family. But it didn't take long before the guilt-tripping started. Emily framed her situation as if she deserved a bigger share of the inheritance because, as she put it, it's for the kids. Now, let me clarify, Emily and Eric don't even have kids yet, but apparently that didn't stop her from leveraging hypothetical future children to make her case. She started telling Dad that her financial problems would fix themselves if only she had a larger slice of the pie. Dad, to his credit, held firm. He said the will was fair and wouldn't be changed. I thought that would put the issue to rest, but I underestimated Emily's determination. Around this time, I noticed she started visiting Dad more often than usual. She'd drop by under the guise of checking in on him and being the dutiful daughter. It didn't sit right with me, but I couldn't prove she had ulterior motives. My girlfriend, Sophia, who's 29 and probably the most perceptive person I know, flagged it too. Sophia was convinced Emily was up to something and warned me to keep an eye on things. At first, I thought she might be overreacting, until I overheard Emily on the phone. She was talking about a lawyer. I couldn't catch everything, but the words options and estate stood out like red flags waving in my face. That's when the pieces started falling into place. Emily wasn't just dropping hints or whining to Dad about needing more money. She was actively scheming. My instincts told me to dig deeper, and I started paying closer attention to her behavior. She'd been unusually sweet to Dad, helping him with errands and being overly attentive. It was so out of character for her that it screamed manipulation. The next big clue came at a family gathering. Emily brought Eric along, and while they're usually low-key at these things, this time was different. Eric seemed smug, almost gloating about big plans they had coming up. It didn't take a genius to connect the dots. Whatever Emily was plotting, Eric was in on it too. The final straw for me was when Dad mentioned offhandedly that Emily had asked about his medical records. She'd framed it as concern for his health, but why would she need access to his records unless she planned to use them? Sophia and I talked it over, and she pointed out the obvious. Emily was likely trying to build a case to challenge Dad's mental capacity, all to push through changes to the will. It's hard to put into words how infuriating it was to realize how far Emily might go. This wasn't just sibling rivalry or petty bickering anymore. It was a full-blown attempt to manipulate Dad into giving her what she wanted. I knew I had to act, but I also knew I couldn't confront her without proof. That's when I decided to dig deeper into her activities. I wasn't going to let her get away with this, not while Dad's health and legacy were on the line. And so, the stage was set. Emily's subtle hints and emotional manipulation had escalated into outright scheming, and I was determined to uncover the truth. I didn't know what I'd find, but one thing was clear: this was far from over. Update 1. The unraveling started when an old family friend casually mentioned over coffee that my sister Emily had been asking around about estate lawyers. He thought it was odd, considering our dad already had a long-time attorney managing his affairs. That tiny comment sent alarm bells ringing. It seemed Emily wasn't just visiting Dad more often, she was setting something in motion. I decided to visit Dad to see if anything unusual was going on. While we were chatting in his living room, I noticed a folder on the coffee table labeled with the law firm's logo. It stood out because it wasn't the firm Dad usually used. When I asked him about it, he looked confused at first, then admitted that Emily had convinced him to meet with a new lawyer just to explore options. My stomach dropped. Inside the folder was a draft of a will. The distribution wasn't the equal split Dad had always promised. It listed Emily as the primary beneficiary, with a significantly smaller portion left for me. Dad said he hadn't signed anything, which was a relief, but he seemed unsure about the whole situation. He admitted that Emily had been pressuring him, talking about her financial struggles and how she needed the money to secure her future. I pointed out how unfair this draft was, and he seemed genuinely taken aback, as if he hadn't fully understood the implications of what she was asking. He promised to think it over and talk to his original lawyer before making any changes. A few days later, we had a family gathering at Dad's house. Emily and her husband Eric showed up acting unusually confident. Eric, in particular, was practically glowing with smugness, talking vaguely about big changes and exciting opportunities they had lined up. It didn't take a genius to figure out what they were banking on. His attitude only confirmed my suspicions. They were counting on the inheritance to fix their financial mess. The conversation quickly turned tense. I brought up the draft I'd found, and Emily didn't even deny it. She launched into a justification, claiming that as a married woman with a struggling household, she needed the money more. She said I had no real responsibilities and would be fine without an equal share. That's when the argument exploded. Emily accused me of being paranoid and selfish, while I pointed out how manipulative she'd been with Dad. Eric jumped in, trying to back her up, but it only made things worse. The shouting match left Dad visibly upset, and he eventually told us all to stop, saying he was putting the inheritance discussions on hold. He looked so worn out that it was clear the stress was getting to him. Later that week, Sophia, my girlfriend, suggested I dig deeper to protect Dad and his assets. She reminded me of how persistent Emily could be when she wanted something. That's when I decided to check out Dad's emails and messages, with his permission, of course. Sure enough, I found a string of exchanges between Emily and the new lawyer. They didn't just discuss the will. There were explicit instructions on how to argue that Dad was no longer of sound mind if he resisted making changes. It was disgusting to read. My own sister was planning to undermine his mental capacity just to secure a bigger share of the inheritance. As if that wasn't enough, I found out from Dad's medical provider that Emily had requested access to his records, citing concern for his health. It was clear she was laying the groundwork for a potential legal fight. Sophia and I agreed that this wasn't something we could handle alone. I reached out to a lawyer of my own to discuss the situation. He explained that if any sudden changes were made to the will, we'd be able to contest them, but we needed to keep gathering evidence. Meanwhile, Emily wasn't backing down. She began spreading rumors to our extended family, painting me as the greedy, selfish sibling trying to rob her of her rightful share. Some of them bought into her story, calling me to express their disappointment, while others stayed neutral, not wanting to get involved. It was exhausting, but I knew I couldn't let her win. Eventually, Dad, feeling overwhelmed by everything, decided to take matters into his own hands. He met with his original lawyer and asked for the will to be amended again, this time appointing a neutral executor to oversee the estate. This move was meant to ensure fairness and reduce the risk of manipulation. When Emily found out, she completely lost it. She accused Dad of betraying her and claimed he'd always favored me, which wasn't true. Her meltdown was so intense that Dad ended the conversation and asked her to leave. The last straw came when Sophia and I noticed a pattern in Emily's behavior. She wasn't just desperate, she was escalating. Every step she took felt more drastic than the last. It was clear she wasn't going to stop until she got what she wanted, and I had a sinking feeling that her next move would be even more extreme. I had no idea what she was planning, but I knew it wasn't going to be good. Update 2. Things escalated quickly after Dad's decision to appoint a neutral executor for the will. Emily was furious, and the tension between us was like a ticking time bomb. Then, out of nowhere, Dad suffered another health scare, a much more serious one. He was rushed to the hospital after experiencing chest pain, and the doctors confirmed it was a mild heart attack. It shook everyone, and suddenly the drama over the inheritance seemed small compared to the fear of losing him. Emily, however, used the situation to her advantage. She swooped into the hospital and immediately began positioning herself as the primary decision-maker. She took control of everything, speaking to the doctors, managing Dad's medications, and even trying to dictate visiting hours. It was clear she was sidelining me, making it almost impossible for me to have private moments with Dad. She justified it as helping him recover, but it felt more like she was trying to isolate him. During one of my visits to Dad's house to pick up some of his personal items, I noticed something alarming. A small lockbox where he kept important financial documents was open and almost empty. Several bank statements, insurance policies, and even copies of his will were missing. I called Sophia, and we agreed it was time to take legal action. If Emily was planning to tamper with the will again or exploit Dad's accounts, I needed to be ready. I contacted my lawyer, who helped me file a formal notice contesting any unauthorized changes to the will. This notice essentially froze any updates or transactions related to Dad's estate until we could confirm his full consent and mental capacity. It was a necessary move, but it triggered a full-blown family war. Emily caught wind of the legal notice and immediately went on the offensive. She called several relatives, spinning a story about how I was trying to take everything for myself. Some of them bought into her sob story, while others, especially those who knew her track record with money, started questioning her motives. The family was divided, and tensions were running high. The next major blow came when Emily staged a dramatic confrontation at the hospital. She waited until I was visiting Dad, then burst into the room, accusing me of ruining the family and stressing Dad out. Her voice was loud enough to draw attention from the nurses, and her crocodile tears only added to the chaos. Dad, already weak, begged her to calm down, but she wouldn't stop. Eventually, hospital security had to intervene and ask her to leave. Later that evening, Dad asked to speak with me privately. He looked exhausted and vulnerable as he admitted he felt overwhelmed by everything Emily was doing. He said she'd been pressuring him constantly, even visiting him at odd hours to bring up money and inheritance issues. It was clear he was being manipulated, but he felt too drained to fight back. That conversation made it even more urgent to protect him from further harm. The situation took another turn when I uncovered evidence of a joint bank account Emily had opened in Dad's name. The account had significant withdrawals, some of which were suspiciously timed around her recent shopping sprees and loan payments. It was a textbook case of financial exploitation. Armed with this new information, I confronted Eric at a family event. Eric's usual smug demeanor faltered as the conversation heated up. He tried to deflect at first, but eventually slipped, admitting they had been counting on the inheritance to pay off some of their mounting debts. That was when the cracks in their united front began to show. Eric's financial troubles were worse than I'd thought. He was on the verge of bankruptcy, and it was clear Emily's desperation was partly fueled by their crumbling finances. The family lawyer stepped in shortly after this discovery. At my request, he froze any pending will-related changes until Dad had fully recovered. This move sent Emily into a tailspin. She escalated her behavior, threatening to cut Dad off entirely unless he fixed things. Her tantrums were becoming more frequent and more public, further damaging her reputation with the extended family. Then came another shocking revelation. Eric's financial house of cards collapsed. News of his bankruptcy filing spread quickly, and it only added to the pressure on Emily. She became more erratic, making decisions that didn't make sense, like attempting to transfer Dad to a different medical facility without informing anyone. The hospital staff flagged the attempt and called me immediately, suspecting something wasn't right. The breaking point came during one of my visits to the hospital. Dad, in tears, apologized for letting things spiral so far out of control. He admitted he should have put stronger boundaries in place earlier, but he never imagined Emily would go to such lengths. It was a heartbreaking moment, but it strengthened my resolve to protect him. The final blow of this chapter came when I found out from a trusted source that Emily might have forged Dad's signature on a crucial financial document. The implications of this were huge, and it confirmed that she was willing to cross legal and ethical lines to get what she wanted. At this point, it wasn't just about the inheritance anymore. It was about stopping her from causing further harm. Update 3. The situation reached a critical turning point when my lawyer managed to obtain a copy of one of the financial documents Emily had supposedly handled for Dad. This document, claiming to grant Emily more control over Dad's accounts, had his signature on it, or so it seemed. My lawyer reviewed it carefully and pointed out several inconsistencies. The handwriting was close but not a perfect match, and there were irregularities in how the signature aligned with Dad's usual style. It was enough to warrant further investigation. I confronted Dad with this discovery, and his reaction was a mix of confusion and frustration. He was adamant that he hadn't signed any such document. Armed with this knowledge, he decided to call Emily over to address the issue directly. When she arrived, Dad asked her to explain the document. Emily denied everything, claiming she had no idea how it had been created. She insisted it must have been some sort of mistake, but her defensive tone and refusal to cooperate raised even more suspicions. At this point, I had no choice but to take things to the authorities. I filed a formal report with the police regarding the potential forgery and financial exploitation. This move created an immediate rift in the family. Emily was furious, accusing me of dragging our private family matters into the public eye and ruining her reputation. She doubled down on her narrative that I was manipulating Dad and trying to cut her out of the inheritance. Eric, however, was cracking under the pressure. He wasn't as composed as Emily and started avoiding direct conversations about the situation. Under mounting scrutiny, Eric eventually admitted to one of my cousins that Emily had orchestrated the forgery. He claimed he hadn't been directly involved but knew about it after the fact. This admission spread quickly among the family, adding fuel to the already blazing fire. While this was happening, our family lawyer uncovered more suspicious transactions tied to the joint account Emily had set up. These transactions were significant, including large cash withdrawals and payments that didn't align with Dad's typical spending patterns. It painted a clear picture of financial exploitation. The evidence was mounting, and Emily's position was becoming more precarious. Despite the growing evidence against her, Emily refused to back down. At a family gathering, she created a massive scene, yelling that I was ruining her life and trying to steal her share of the inheritance. Her dramatic outburst drew a lot of attention, but instead of gaining sympathy, she ended up alienating more relatives. Some of them started to see through her lies, while a few still clung to the belief that she was the victim. The family was divided, and the tension was palpable. Emily's next move was to take the battle to social media. She started posting cryptic messages and not-so-subtle jabs about being betrayed by family. She even shared a vague but emotional post implying I was emotionally abusive and out to destroy her. The posts backfired as mutual friends and extended family members began questioning her behavior. Some even reached out to me privately, sharing their doubts about her narrative. The stress of everything started taking a toll on Dad's health. He became withdrawn and visibly weaker, prompting another visit to the doctor. The stress-related symptoms were concerning enough that I decided to prioritize his care over everything else. I consulted my lawyer about filing a restraining order against Emily to protect Dad, but we agreed to hold off for now while other legal actions were in motion. Around this time, Eric's support for Emily started to waver. Rumors of financial trouble in their marriage were confirmed when Eric began distancing himself from the drama entirely. He stopped attending family events and even moved out temporarily, citing the stress of the situation. It became evident that their relationship was on shaky ground. Emily, desperate to salvage her position, tried to make amends with Dad. She visited him unexpectedly, bringing flowers and acting overly apologetic. But Dad, wary of her intentions, kept their interactions brief. He told me later that he didn't trust her anymore and wasn't sure if he ever could. Meanwhile, the legal battle escalated. My lawyer filed a motion to block Emily from accessing any of Dad's financial accounts. This move was a significant step in ensuring his assets were protected while the case unfolded. Emily's behavior grew more erratic, and her once calculated moves started looking more like desperate flailing. The The final blow of this chapter came when I discovered Emily hadn't been acting alone. A surprising lead revealed that she had been consulting an outsider, a shady financial advisor known for offering questionable services. This revelation raised even more questions about how far she was willing to go to secure the inheritance. It also made me realize the situation was bigger than I'd initially thought. As I dug deeper into this new connection, the puzzle pieces started falling into place. Emily's escalating schemes, the forged document, and her erratic behavior all pointed to a larger, more calculated plan. I had no idea who this advisor was or what role they played, but one thing was clear: this wasn't over yet. Update 4. The first breakthrough came when I managed to connect Emily to the so-called financial advisor she'd been consulting. Through some careful digging, helped by a cousin who had overheard Emily bragging about her expert guidance, I discovered the man was notorious for shady dealings. His name popped up in several online forums discussing financial scams, with stories of people losing money through forged documents and exploitation of elderly clients. It was exactly the kind of operation Emily seemed desperate enough to fall for. When my lawyer pieced everything together, the full scope of the advisor's involvement became clear. His advice to Emily had been to exploit Dad's recent health issues, forge documents when necessary, and, if it came to it, argue that Dad wasn't mentally competent to make decisions. The forged signature on the financial document I'd found was only the tip of the iceberg. My worst fears were confirmed. Emily had taken steps that were not just unethical but outright illegal. With this new information, my lawyer made a bold move. He filed a motion to appoint a third-party guardian for Dad's estate. This meant that neither Emily nor I would have direct control over Dad's finances until the legal matters were resolved. It was a tough call, but it ensured that Dad's assets were protected from further exploitation. At the same time, the lawyer secured the original copy of Dad's will, locking it away so it couldn't be tampered with. As the legal pressure mounted, Emily's behavior became increasingly erratic. She started showing up unannounced at Dad's house, sometimes late at night, demanding to talk. She called family members constantly, trying to sway them back to her side. Most of them had already heard enough by this point. When word spread about the financial advisor and the forgery, many relatives who had initially supported her began cutting ties. Publicly, Emily was unraveling. The police investigation into the forgery and financial exploitation also gained traction. Emily was formally questioned, as was the financial advisor. Their stories didn't line up, and it became clear that Emily had been working closely with him to execute her scheme. Meanwhile, Eric decided he'd had enough. He filed for divorce, claiming he'd been kept in the dark about the extent of Emily's illegal activities. It was a move that surprised no one. Eric had been distancing himself from Emily ever since the family drama began escalating. Emily's downward spiral hit rock bottom at a public event for a mutual family friend. She showed up unexpectedly and caused a scene, blaming everyone in the room for her problems: Dad, me, Eric, and even the extended family. Her meltdown was so extreme that the hosts asked her to leave. This only added to her humiliation, and by the end of the week, she was the subject of gossip in every corner of our community. Dad, deeply hurt by Emily's betrayal, made a painful decision. He called his lawyer and had the will rewritten to exclude Emily entirely. The bulk of the estate would now go to me, with a portion set aside for charity. It wasn't about the money, it was about ensuring that Emily couldn't continue to manipulate or exploit him. When I saw the signed document, it felt like both a victory and a tragedy. Dad had to protect himself from his own daughter, something no parent should ever have to do. News of the police investigation spread quickly. Emily's reputation, already tarnished, took another massive hit. Friends and acquaintances who had supported her distanced themselves, unwilling to associate with someone implicated in forgery and elder abuse. She became a pariah almost overnight, and the shame seemed to be unbearable for her. As the dust settled, Dad asked me to take over his finances and medical care formally. I became his legal guardian, ensuring he could live the rest of his life without worrying about manipulation or exploitation. It was a heavy responsibility, but one I gladly took on. In a last-ditch effort, Emily reached out to me directly. She claimed she had been manipulated by the financial advisor, that she'd made mistakes but didn't deserve to lose her family over them. Her words felt hollow after everything that had happened. I told her the decisions had already been made and that the damage she caused couldn't simply be undone with an apology. Shortly after, the financial advisor was arrested. He had been implicated in multiple similar scams across the region, and Emily's involvement in his schemes added weight to the charges. Her cooperation with him painted a clear picture of her intentions, and while she wasn't formally charged yet, the evidence against her was damning. The chapter closed with an unexpected discovery. While organizing Dad's belongings, I found an old letter tucked away in his desk. In it, he expressed regret over how Emily had been raised, how her entitlement and selfishness were partially the result of his own parenting. He explained that his decisions regarding the inheritance were meant to protect her from herself as much as they were meant to secure his legacy. Reading his words, I realized this was never just about money. It was about family, trust, and the consequences of choices made long ago. For now, we wait to see what the legal process brings, but one thing is certain: Emily's downfall was a direct result of her own actions, and there's no undoing what's been done. Update 5. After discovering the letter from Dad, I decided to share its contents with him. It was emotional for both of us. The letter detailed his regrets about enabling Emily's entitlement and how he wished he had raised her with more accountability. It also explained his rationale for cutting her out of the will. He felt it was the only way to protect her from causing more harm to herself and others. Dad thanked me for finding it, saying it gave him closure he didn't know he needed. The rewritten will was finalized shortly afterward. Emily was officially disinherited, with the estate divided between me and a charitable trust Dad had always wanted to establish. It wasn't an easy decision for him, but he believed it was the right one. The trust's mission would focus on education for underprivileged youth, something Dad had been passionate about since his days as an entrepreneur. Meanwhile, Eric came forward with new information. In exchange for leniency in the legal investigation, he provided evidence detailing Emily's full involvement in the forgery and financial schemes. He handed over text messages, emails, and even receipts that tied Emily directly to the financial advisor. Eric claimed he had been manipulated by Emily and didn't know the full extent of her plans until it was too late. While his testimony painted him as a less active participant, it didn't absolve him entirely. The legal proceedings against Emily moved forward swiftly. She was charged with forgery, fraud, and elder abuse. The case drew some local attention, which only added to the strain on our already fractured family. During the trial, her lawyer argued for leniency, citing Emily's mental health struggles and the influence of the financial advisor. While it didn't excuse her actions, the court took it into consideration. Emily received a probation sentence, mandatory counseling, and a hefty fine. It wasn't jail time, but the consequences were still significant. As the truth about Emily's actions became public, extended family members who had initially supported her began reaching out to me and Dad. Many apologized for believing her lies and admitted they hadn't seen the full picture. Some even offered to help Dad in any way they could, though he politely declined, saying he just wanted peace moving forward. With the legal battles behind us, Dad's health began to improve. The stress that had weighed on him for months was finally lifting, and he started to regain his strength. We spent more time together, and our relationship grew stronger than ever. Sophia, as always, was my rock throughout this ordeal, supporting both me and Dad in every way she could. One of the first things Dad and I did with the inheritance was establish the charitable trust he had always dreamed of. Seeing it come to life was a proud moment for both of us. It felt like a positive way to turn a painful chapter into something meaningful and lasting. As for Emily, she moved away shortly after the trial. From what I've heard, she's kept a low profile, avoiding most of the family and focusing on rebuilding her life. The once outspoken, attention-seeking Emily is now a shadow of her former self. While she hasn't directly apologized to me or Dad, mutual acquaintances say she's expressed remorse privately. I don't know if we'll ever reconcile, but for now I'm content with the distance. Eric, on the other hand, reached out to me for a final conversation. He admitted his role in the schemes, but maintained that Emily's manipulation had been a driving force. He said he regretted not stepping in sooner and hoped to move forward with a clean slate. While I couldn't completely forgive him, I appreciated his honesty. It felt like closure. To celebrate the end of a tumultuous year, I organized a small family gathering. It was a chance to focus on healing and reconnecting with those who had supported us through everything. Seeing Dad surrounded by people who truly cared about him was a reminder of what really mattered. For the first time in a long while, there was laughter in the house again. Sophia's role in this resolution cannot be overstated. Her sharp instincts and unwavering support were instrumental in helping me navigate this chaos. She often kept me grounded when emotions ran high, and her advice was invaluable. I don't think I could have managed without her. After sharing this story, I was overwhelmed by the response from Reddit. So many of you offered advice, encouragement, and even similar stories that helped me feel less alone. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that family dynamics can be messy, but setting boundaries and protecting what's right is always worth it. This ordeal, while painful, has taught me the importance of resilience and the value of genuine relationships. It's ironic. In a way, Emily's schemes were meant to tear us apart, but they ended up strengthening the bond between me, Dad, and the people who truly matter. If you've read this far, thank you for sticking with me. This has been a journey I never expected to share, but I hope it serves as a reminder to trust your instincts, stand up for what's right, and never let toxic behavior go unchecked.